independent economic researcher. Pye Ian joins us now for his views on this. Mr. Ian, welcome. It sounds grim. What's your perspective? What's your take on this? And if you can, what would be the underlying factors that have, contributed to this bleak outlook by the UN?
Well, thanks for having me. People keep using the word recession with an R, whereas they should be using the word depression, and few analysts and few media outsources are actually shifting towards that usage. This is more like a global economic depression, and the second one to come along in essentially 90 years, if you think about the prior one in the 80s, in the 1930s. U.S. unemployment rate is about to jump from under 4% as stated to some 30% based on the government's stay-at-home and related orders, which have resulted in mass firings, firms shutting down, and worse. The thing is, though, the true U.S. unemployment rate had been north of 15% since the 2008 financial crisis. It's just that the numbers had been hidden until this year. Both the prior depression of the 1930s and early 40s and this one, which effectively started, again, with that 08 crisis, but has been nicely hidden from the public until it mathematically could not be hidden anymore, are coordinated by a tightly networked system of global central banking in order to achieve much longer-term ends. Interest rates are essentially at zero and will be going negative in the US and UK, as they have already gone negative in Japan and Europe and parts of Europe. Rates cannot be raised without causing massive nominal deflation, which Western central banks have been seeking to avoid and avert for nearly 20 years now, ever since the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, and the Federal Reserve, then headed by Alan Greenspan, aggressively cut interest rates to avoid deflation. Those actions, which the Bernanke Fed took over as the custodian of the Fed 15 years ago, caused multiple asset and credit bubbles, which burst both in 2008, as stated, and today, as we're seeing. Now, were the global human population, notedly, to shrink somehow, rapidly and aggressively, either through aging out, world war, mass pandemics, other engineered methods in the minds of sociopaths, or perhaps all of the above, then that would be one key way to alleviate monetary pressures on the need for necessary, overdue interest rate adjustments higher, considering that measured productivity is not matching the needs for a quote-unquote natural rate of inflation that would then justify raising interest rates without causing catastrophe for the moneyed classes. So government responses to the coronavirus pandemic over the past roughly 2 months have managed to ever so conveniently overlap with the need to mark global asset values, quote-unquote, to market, to borrow an accounting term, meaning to forcefully deflate the results of pent-up collective speculative activity, which had been substituted for actual sustainable economic growth. This globally sweeping pandemic economic bubble popping, if you will, had been planned for a while. Again, whether the coronavirus health crisis happens to have been clandestinely tactically deployed to expedite the process or not.
Right.
And in order to consolidate assets and recalibrate the international monetary system using means involving cryptocurrencies eventually, the blockchain, and artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and other technocratic means of implementing complete control on surviving human beings, a key phrase, who will presumably be vetted for their abilities to work, produce, and consume in a new world order system, which can only be truly understood if one were to invest in researching hermetic, esoteric history and philosophy, not merely modern, exoteric, mostly Cartesian-based disciplines, let alone the cult that passes for economic science. So just briefly, you have to think like the 0.00001% elite transatlantic establishment think, and that subscription of the elite, how they think.
Okay, and Mr. Ian, we're running a bit short on time here. I'm just looking at the cases of coronavirus around the globe and countries in Latin America, which the UN has predicted is heading into a deep recession or depression, as you alluded to, in 2020. The cases in Latin America are slightly on the lower end of that table. Should these rates expand to a level similar to the US and Europe? Is there a fear perhaps for, of a reduction in economic activity due to lockdowns, for example? But then again, that could be said for every region. Why have they focused on Latin America?
Well, Latin America, I mean, you look at foremost the overlapping time-wise and news-wise of the coronavirus's announcement as a pandemic, confirmation as a pandemic by the WHO and CDC, and the oddly placed accusations of the Maduro government within Caracas as somehow being drug smugglers, despite surrounding nations to Venezuela being much more historically and currently involved in drug smuggling, beg the question over the need for some sort of forced regime change in that very oil-rich country, as well as in the wider region, in order to deflect any further flirtations with socialism or non-Washington consensus type thinking. And hence, whether it's Latin America and South America, Central America, the African continent, some folks were asking me why it hadn't been so sweeping across Africa as it has been across other parts of the world, certainly like nations like Iran and Italy. I mean, if you consider things in tactical fashion and consider that a pandemic just by definition, grows exponentially, we can expect to have disease rates and eventual death rates across Latin America and across Africa become exponential over the next several months. And then, more importantly, expect the savior figure, the white knight, the sort of solution providers to not coincidentally offer economic solutions, vaccine solutions, sweeping healthcare and infrastructural solutions that would seek to isolate and alienate any sort of Eurasian players within said continents, namely South America and Africa, and certainly West Asia and other parts of the world.
Okay.
And if you're looking at those trends, then you start to see. Yep.
I'm afraid we have run out of time, Mr. Ian. I'd like to thank you for your contribution to our bulletin. Pye Ian, the independent economic researcher.